Well, welcome, welcome. It's really wonderful to see all these faces. I'm Janet Gyatso. I am part of the Buddhist Ministry Initiative team here at the Harvard Divinity School, and I'm also the academic dean of the Divinity School this year, so therefore I'm giving you our first welcome. It's really wonderful to see all of you, many of you whom I know from before, also some new faces that I'm really looking forward to meet. And it's just a really great experience to see such a wide range of people who are here. And this was really our hope, is really to get a wide range of people who are serving or working within the area of Buddhism, Buddhist ministry, Buddhist studies, and coming from a wide range of backgrounds and doing it in a wide range of different ways. And that was the whole point of getting all of you and all of us together so we could all learn from each other. So I'm so excited. So thank you all for coming. I just wanted to tell you about a little bit about the program. First, I wanted just to start, though, with my own certainly my own excitement about the nature of the field of what Buddhist ministry really is. We're using that term ministry here at the Divinity School. It's been a term that's long been used even before the Buddhist dimension of that program came here. My own first encounter, I just wanted to share, it's actually quite a personal story, but it was right after I moved to Harvard Divinity School, moved here in 2001. In 2004, my father, who was in his late 80s, suddenly became very sick, and in a very quick couple of weeks, he passed away. And, we were prepared, and we were, mourning, and just at the moment of him passing away, he was actually in a hospital in Martha's Vineyard, where he was living, and he actually passed away in the middle of the night. And then right away, these people, these women, came into the room, who I had no idea who they were, and they were they sort of introduced themselves as hospice. I mean, believe it or not, I didn't actually know even what hospice was. And they come immediately to comfort you and help you deal with this loss. And this woman, older woman, started speaking to me and telling me how well, this is the way that life is. All things are impermanent, and and we all have to die, and it's part of the natural process. And she starts, and I'm saying, wait a minute, I didn't say this to her, but I'm thinking in my mind, I teach this, I don't need to hear this. But and she wasn't using a Buddhist idiom at all. She was she was giving me a Buddhist sermon. I mean, it was straight Buddhism, and she doesn't come from a Buddhist background. I was really blown away by that, and to see how much Buddhist ideas and practices and ways of teaching had infiltrated, the mainstream of hospice, at least in the United States. So. I just want to give you a little bit of the history of this program here, just first of all to introduce you a little bit to where you are. This is Harvard Divinity School, which is one of the so-called professional schools of Harvard University. So this school teaches primarily master's students. So we have two very large master's programs. One is called Master of Theological Studies. It's not really necessarily theology in the way that you think of it, but it is a 2-year program. And many of the students go on to PhDs. A lot of other students go on to careers in other areas. It's kind of a wide range of career paths out of the Master of Theological Studies. And then we also have an MDiv, a Master of Divinity, which is a 3-year program. And actually the two are very similar. It's just that the MDiv also has a substantial part of field work, which is specifically in kinds of ministry, chaplaincy, working in soup kitchens, working in religious communities, getting training in how you lead a religious community, and also how you use your spiritual values to help people in a whole variety of ways. So those are our two programs. Undergraduates from Harvard University also come here and take take our courses. So we get a lot of undergraduates in our courses, and we also have a lot of PhD students who are coming here as well. The Divinity School actually has a doctoral program, which is called the Doctor of Theology instead of Doctor of Philosophy. That actually is being phased out. It's very close to what a PhD is, but we have a lot of PhD students who are also studying with our faculty here as well. But the school itself, so we bridge into the rest of the university quite a lot, both into the undergraduate and into the doctoral programs. So I came here in 2001. A chair was established in Buddhist studies. It's called the Hershey Professor of Buddhist Studies, and so I got hired. And again, to be very frank, I had never barely even been in a divinity school. I kind of had no idea what it was. And I was really coming here because I thought, okay, Harvard, so yeah, divinity school, whatever. But I just want to be here. And do Buddhist studies, in the academics, and there's a lot of colleagues who do Tibetan language, Sanskrit, Chinese, Pali, all these other kinds of things. And, once I got here and started to see what was going on, I did get intrigued. And of course, I've been on a steep learning curve, but I learned a lot. But so one of the interesting things that was happening just around the time that I came in was partially because of this chair, not me per se, but having a chair in Buddhist studies, and actually there were already several other chairs in other religions besides Buddhism. This university and the Divinity School itself has a largely Protestant background. Most of the faculty here do teach courses in various kinds of Christian studies, but slowly the school has actually expanded. At this point, we have several people doing Buddhist studies, we have several people doing Islamic studies, we have several people doing Hinduism, and several people doing African religions and a variety of other religious traditions. So we started changing our master's, the MTS program, which had, when I came here, there were 3 parts of the master's program. There was one that was called, there was focus on the Bible and religious scripture. I forget what it was technically called. Scriptural interpretation. Dudley Rose, who's going to be talking to in a moment, is the expert on all these things. And then there was a second area, which was sociology of religion. What was that called? Christianity and culture. But that was about, I never can rename names. It was about ethics, it was about theology, it was about religion and society. And then there was a third area called religions of the world, right? Okay, I got that one right. So when I first started teaching here, I was a little bit confused because I said, well, what I teach, there's scriptures. And we also have ethics, and we also have theology, and there's also a lot of sociology of Buddhism. And I didn't understand why there was a separate category called religions of the world in which we recapitulate all these types of approaches to the study of religion that were done in the main part of the school. So, and other faculty and colleagues felt that this was an issue too. And so we decided to change it, and we integrated all of the religious traditions in those areas. So now we have scriptural interpretation for all of the religions that are taught here, and so on and so forth. So that was a major, major change in the curriculum of the school. But at the same time, there was also the question of the MDiv program, which was much more focused on professional ministry per se. And that was a little bit of a harder nut to crack, but what dawned on me, actually, even though I never had any training in doing ministry in any kind of area of any sort, is I really felt that this would be a place, it would be a wonderful place to start training Buddhist ministers in very much the same way that students who are largely in Christian traditions were getting trained. And the sort of motto or basic phrase of this whole program is to produce a learned ministry. So it's a kind of this is our very specific situation here, it's a combination of people having access both to other courses outside the Divinity School so they can take courses in other parts of Harvard, but also a very well-developed ministry program and a very progressive ministry, which was very open-minded and very open to a lot of different approaches. Why not do that for Buddhist students as well? And indeed, why not do it for students of other religious traditions too? So that's when we started to try to think about Buddhist ministry being taught at this place. In order to get it going, for me, again, I didn't know much about what was going on in the area and the kinds of all you guys and many of the organizations that you work in and work for, I also wasn't so up to speed on what all that was. I was learning very quickly. Actually, it took a 3-year colloquium with a lot of our students. We have students who come here who are already, fully enlightened masters in various realms. So they were very, very helpful. And then what we started doing was we started offering courses that were specifically on Buddhist ministry. So asking colleagues to do courses on Buddhist chaplaincy. What does it mean to do these kind of ministry types of occupations and activities from a Buddhist perspective? And exactly what are the issues in that? And that's what got us off the ground. We were very, very fortunate to, at a certain point, make connection with the Robert H. and Ho Foundation, who I want to thank profusely. They are behind our program, and they also are funded fully this conference, who actually made it easier for us to, first of all, we got an administrative assistant who was, a coordinator, who is Julie Gillette.
Right here.
And there she is. Who also came here as a fully enlightened Dakini, who has been amazing in organizing all of these activities that we're doing, and especially this conference. So we really have to thank you for your extremely hard work on this. And it also funded various courses that we have outside adjunct professors coming in to teach. And also the final piece of it was a program to bring scholars, basically young scholars from Asia who were studying in various Buddhist contexts to be part of our programs here. It's actually a 1-year program, but this is our second year, is that right? In which we've had visiting scholars. Some of them are here in the audience. The majority of them are monastics. They have made an enormous contribution to the campus just in general. Everybody loves Buddhist monks now on the entire campus, because actually every single one of the Buddhist monks who have come here and the one lay person, all of them actually are completely enlightened, actually, and that's true. And that's a big part of also what we were trying to do, is to have this international component, about which I'll say more later. So anyway, here we are together. One idea that we had, which we've been working on for a long time, was indeed to gather people in the area who are working in what we consider Buddhist ministry, again, a very broad understanding of what that term is, to get together. Our aim for the conference is really, how do we take this moment of opportunity for people working in a variety of Buddhist contexts to up their game, to work better, to connect more with social issues, with both issues within Buddhist communities and also communities just in general in the United States as well as internationally. Leadership is a very, very important ideal for the program, and it's also a very important ideal for ministry in general here. And we really feel that this is the moment for Buddhism to step up to the world stage, and that it has a lot to contribute at every different level. So we thought, all of us talking together about what we do, and especially how do we educate students? What kinds of things do students have to learn in order to function in this kind of context? We're kind of still figuring out. I'm sure as you share some of your own experiences with us over the next 2 days, we'll find out that you too are, continually learning and refining, and that's the point for us to communicate together, and also, of course, to network. And I really hope that all of you meet everybody else, and don't just stick to your friends, but say hi to everyone. So anyway, I just want to welcome all of you again. Thank you so much for coming. I have high hopes for the conference, and now we're going to start our first panel.
Thank you very much, Janet. That was a wonderful snapshot of some of where we've been. I'm Dudley Rose. I'm the Associate Dean for Ministry Studies, which means that the Master of Divinity program that we've just been talking about is the program that I oversee here. I came to Harvard in the early 80s to school, and then back a little later to the faculty and the staff. So I've been here for a good long time. And I'll also start with a personal story. I graduated from here in '83 and went to work in ministry, and went to a conference at another local divinity school, at which the keynoter was making almost immediately a very impressive point. And that point was that across the world, the Muslims meet you with a sword, and the Christians meet you with love. And I said, you know, that was not how I was trained at Harvard Divinity School, because the Center for the Study of World Religions that we had, even then, even when we had this category of other religions, made it clear to us that that was not, in fact, I told the keynoter that that did very little justice to either of our histories, that it was a rather gross misstatement on both parts. So it was easy for me to know this was the place that I would want to do work in theological education. This was the kind of place I wanted to be. And it was, in a way, a step that were preparing for decades because of the attunement that there was to the study of other religious traditions with a great deal of respect. When we came to the era that Janet really inaugurated, we began to switch the rhetoric a little. And we thought of ourselves, when we were largely a Protestant denominational, multi-denominational divinity school, preparing people in many cases for Protestant ministries, that we were turning out students and ministers who had a good deal of knowledge and respect for other traditions. So we learned about these other traditions. We've come now to a time when we rather use the language, we learn from other traditions. We learn from each other. And I think that, to me, that capsulizes the way in which we think of this integrated Master of Divinity program here, that is not, it's not separate tracks, it's not silos, it's people in this classroom, and Intro to Ministry Studies, every entering MDiv sits here every fall and has to read everything from Gregory the Great to Buddhist texts and talk with each other about it. And it's a tremendous experience in watching that conversation grow. The people who are here tonight are folks who serve in this program and on the committee that kind of oversees it and thinks about its progress. And so we're going to hear from them as they talk a little bit about their work. Now that we're starting there, this is because this is where we are, but we want to move very quickly after tonight to finding out where everybody is, because this is not really about us being on stage with a spotlight, but we did want to start there. So I'm going to do a couple of things quickly first. I'm going to say that those of you who have never been here before and don't have any idea where the bathrooms are, if you go out these doors and down to the area which was that kind of big center area with the entrances on both sides, if you just go down all those stairs at the bottom to the left or the right, you will find bathrooms. I think to the left if you're men, if you're women, you can go either way. So, is that right? Yeah. Are you reading more into what I said? No. Yes. Thank you, Perry, for bailing me out. So let me just introduce, Janet has already introduced herself and is the Hershey Professor of Buddhist Studies. And I would just say about her, you know of her professionally, she gave a convocation address when she was first here in which she laid out, I think, conceptually some of what we are about, where she said, you know, it's not about training Buddhists in the same way that they would be trained in their own traditions. It's about the fact that Buddhists could learn from somebody like Peter Gomes, who was alive then, about preaching as a way into talking about Dharma talks, in the same way that a Christian minister can learn from Janet about ways of pastoral care. So that was a programmatic piece that Janet gave to us that I think was very instrumental. Cheryl Giles is the Francis Greenwood Peabody Senior Lecturer on Pastoral Care and Counseling. Here at the Divinity School, is, along with Janet, very much at the vanguard of bringing Buddhist ministry to the Divinity School, a practitioner herself, which you may say a word about. And then Emily Click, to my far right, is the Assistant Dean for Ministry Studies and the Director of Field Education, so she oversees all of the students who are in ministry settings of all kinds. And then finally, I have Charlie Hallisey, who is the Yehan Numado Senior Lecturer in Buddhist Literatures, who also himself has an MDiv from Harvard Divinity School. So he was trained in the practice of ministry as well. We're going to give everyone except Janet 10 minutes. Because
I get 20 minutes.
You get 20 minutes. And I'm going to just give a set of questions in between each, just to kind of set the thing in motion. And then once they're done, we'll try to keep it tight so that there's time for questions and answers. So Janet, do you have more you'd like to say?
Yeah. He wants me to say no. So.
No, please.
I'll just share a few comments. This is just some of my observations and some of the issues that have faced us in quote-unquote teaching Buddhist ministry here. You know, again, it's clear the education that students are getting here and the experience is different, obviously, than going to a Buddhist seminary or going to a place that specializes only in Buddhist teachings. And obviously, both of those are very different. Both, I think, have their value. So this is a very specific context. Other contexts, you know, that many of you are associated with are quite different. But this specific context here, in some ways, I do think parallels what some of the challenge is for what we're calling Buddhist ministry, certainly in the West. Namely that a lot of Buddhists or people who are trained in Buddhist ministry are going out and working in prisons, in hospitals, in other kinds of contexts where they're working with people who are not exclusively Buddhist. And they are also working with people who may not have any religious affiliation at all. And so one of the big issues that comes up is the way in which, you know, just like I heard from those hospice people who didn't identify as Buddhists at all, at what point does, when you generalize, when you abstract out Buddhist, say, teachings, you know, on mindfulness, on compassion, on certain types of practices and exercises, but you're making them so general without invoking Buddhist symbols, Buddhist deities, at what point, or is this something to worry about? Does it cease to be Buddhist, per se? And so there's a whole set of questions of how much stretching is too much, or how much, or maybe all the stretching in the world is the right thing. This has been an issue that comes up all the time, I think, in our classes, especially in the ministry classes. And in some ways, at least for myself, sometimes I try to play that issue down, because for me, it's not such a critical issue. You know, I believe in skillful means, and so therefore whatever works is really important, and I'm not so concerned about what's called Buddhist or not. But I do think that, you know, here at least, our policy has been, so we don't have a separate Buddhist ministry track, per se. It's everybody who does ministry here, you can major, so to speak, in one religion or another, but you're all part of the same program. And so in the methodology courses, in many of the arts of pastoral care and counseling and arts of ministry classes are not focused on Buddhism. And so part of what the students are challenged with is how do they take the insights, the wisdoms that are coming from contexts that are not necessarily Buddhist at all. On the one hand, how do they translate them into Buddhist terms? And on the other hand, how do they contribute insights and wisdoms that they are getting from their Buddhist background back into those practices? So I do think it's a two-way street in which, and I do think at some point it's really important for all people who are being trained as Buddhist ministers. I mean, unless you're going to be functioning in a kind of hermitage where everybody is completely, Buddhist, and you're not meeting anyone else except for people who are doing a kind of strict disciplinary practice, to the degree that we're interacting with a whole range of people across the whole spectrum of religious affiliations in the West and also in Asia. I'll say more about the international issue. I won't, talk anymore now today, but we will have a panel on that tomorrow afternoon, where I think other very particular issues come up. But this, I think, is important, and in some ways, some of our students complain when they take the Intro to Ministry class, and it's 90% about either Christianity or another religious tradition that they are not coming out of, and why do they have to learn all that stuff? But we try to counsel them in how this is a really critical part of your training, learning how to translate, learning how also to speak in a common language that you also can recognize similar impulses or similar ethical dilemmas, that you have a lot of information and a lot of ideas from your Buddhist background that you can contribute back. So that's, I think, that's what I would like to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. So Cheryl, you've been, as I said early on, with the Buddhist Ministry Program. You've also taught pastoral care here, where students have been preparing for chaplaincies that even before we had Buddhist ministry were not sectarian, right? That they weren't wearing their traditions as part of their garb for doing chaplaincy. And you're a practitioner yourself. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about kind of your journey in the program, how you move from teaching about chaplaincy in general to thinking about it as Buddhist ministry as well, and anything else along those lines that you'd like to tell us about.
Well, probably the first thing is that my early formation in ministry, practice in ministry, and thinking about ministry began here. I was a student here from 1976 to 79. Don't add it up, it's a long time ago. And came here as one of several women who hoped to be ordained in the Catholic Church. We're in the mid-70s, very progressive time. If some of you remember, there was a women's ordination conference and a kind of push at Rome to try to ordain women. Well, as you know, that never happened, but I was one of those folks that really wanted to be ordained into the priesthood. And so I guess I had to think of something else to do since they wouldn't ordain me. But since that time, after graduating from here, I've been involved in various kinds of ministry. And I just want to sort of bring a little history to this, and so I have some reflections about this. My understanding of Buddhist ministry grew out of my nearly 40 years as a devout Catholic. Daily prayers, rituals, and frequent retreats were the foundation of spiritual formation in the small Black Catholic church in New Haven, Connecticut, that offered me refuge from early childhood to young adulthood. Above all, we learned to have pride in our Blackness and respect ourselves and each other. During this time, I longed to be close to God and spent many hours on my knees reciting the rosaries to assuage my sins. Years later, as an adult, I began to see and experience suffering in the world, yet I had no means to help myself and others. Although faithful to the church, I was weighed down by a theology of original sin that filled me with shame and kept me vigilant, searching for my goodness. And guess what? I discovered that my own goodness, original goodness, was right there all the time, obscured by layers and layers of conditioning about sin. Tell me, how much sin can a little girl commit? So you might be thinking, what does this have to do with Buddhist ministry, and does this concept of original sin matter? Where we come from shapes our understanding and practice of ministry. As an educated, Black, lesbian, recovering Catholic from a working class family who practices Tibetan Buddhism, it does matter. I bring all of this to the practice of Buddhism and hopefully ministry. As teacher, colleague, friend, volunteer, chaplain, mentor, and counselor. Buddhist ministry is not a one-size-fits-all practice. It is being at the margins with the poor, homeless, uneducated, sick, mentally ill, and despairing. It is visiting the sick, dying, and those incarcerated. It is advocating for justice. It is teaching students who are future leaders to stand with the poor, to honor the dignity of each person, and to practice loving kindness, not just for others, but also for ourselves. It is teaching and training students to recognize their white privilege and supporting them as they struggle to acknowledge their racism and what they can do about it. Buddhist ministry is supporting students as they grow into their wholeness, shaped by a strong academic foundation in Buddhist studies and the integration of these studies with the practice of ministry. Finally, Buddhist ministry is providing a safe holding environment where students learn to grapple with not knowing, bearing witness, and offering loving action to create change and fight for justice, just like the Buddha.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Wonderful. Emily, you have a long history in ordained ministry. And a long history in theological education for ministry, and particularly in field education, where you've worked with students of all kinds. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you have seen the strengths of what you have known as you were in that trajectory, and what you've learned new as you come to a place like this, as diverse as it is, and particularly in Buddhist ministry. And can you say a little bit about perhaps what Buddhist ministry students have brought to your own classes as well?
Well, of course, I'm going to answer more questions than he asked me, but I'll start with those. Let me begin by just extending another welcome to you, as Janet and my colleagues here have said. I'm just really excited right now to look out and see you here. We've been dreaming of this and imagining this, and thank you. I know some of you got on a plane in China 35 hours ago, and if you need a little nap, we'll understand. But you've come from all around the world, and we're intensely excited to hear from you. So thank you for listening to us in this first panel. But as has already been said, our real objective is to listen to you and to learn and to engage a conversation. And that is a nice place to start in terms of talking about ministry from my perspective. I recently have begun talking about ministry as curating a conversation. And curating is a strange word not usually used around ministry, so let me explain why I'm saying that. It seems to me that ministers, whether they're Buddhist or Christian or Jewish rabbis or where they're coming from, need to have expertise in bringing diverse people into conversation respectfully with each other, whether they're people from within their tradition or from other traditions, so that folks are having conversation with each other, but also to have skillful conversation with the problems they're trying to engage. Whether those problems are the dying process someone's involved in, or the broken imprisonment system that we have in this country. How do you skillfully engage people in making some kind of progress and deeper understanding of what's at stake in those issues? And that's what we're really engaged in here at Harvard Divinity School. I've almost said teaching here, But our students teach us every bit as much as we teach them. We're in conversation with each other. Our definition of ministry, as you're hearing, if you're new to Harvard Divinity School, is a capacious one. We think of ministry as being about when you bring your gifts into relationship with the world's needs. That might be something that you do in deep dialogue with traditions like Christianity or with Buddhism. We also have a number of students who we call nuns, and we spell it N-O-N-E, and that would be folks who are not claiming a religious tradition but have a deep moral calling to engage in the world. So let me just say something about field education, since some of you know a lot about it and others of you know not at all what we do in field education. Field education is a requirement for the Master of Divinity program. Our students have to do 2 different placements, each of which requires them to be engaged in a ministerial setting for 350 to 400 hours. While they're there, they have a supervisor that has been trained that they meet with for an hour each week to do what we call theological reflection. And then in addition to being in this setting with a supervisor, and the setting might be they go to a prison and they actually engage in prison chaplaincy. Another setting a student might be involved in might be a church. They might go and I had a student who went to eastern Thailand and was a forest monk for a summer. Everything that you could possibly imagine that our students are engaged in. But while they're doing that engagement, they also take a class called meaning making. And in that class, they bring in a case that they've written up. So let's say that one of the hospice workers had a field education student with them. And let's say that student came along and was there at the time of visiting a family who had just lost a loved one, and they became disturbed or confused by something that was said by someone, or maybe that they themselves said. They might write that case up and then bring it into conversation with their peers and a skillful leader such as Chris Berlin, sitting here in the front row, is one of our teachers. And they'll look at that case together and try to make some meaning out of it. Not in a glib way like, oh, well, we know what was going on, but more like, what are the rich layers of meanings and further questions that might emerge from looking at this case respectfully. So that's what we do in field education, and we're deeply grateful to the Ho Foundation, who has enabled us to fund some of these very creative and imaginative Buddhist field education settings. Since we know that inherent in Buddhism is many of these settings are not going to have money to sponsor an internship. And the Ho Foundation recognized that there needed to be some kind of funding to enable full-time students to be able to go to some of these settings, sojourn with them, and listen deeply to the supervision there. As I've been saying, at the heart of what we're trying to teach is something we often talk about as pastoral agility or pastoral imagination. So Dudley asked me to say just a little something about what I have learned from our Buddhist students, either in my classes or in field education. And our students have so much imagination. It gives me hope for the future. And this is a little embarrassing to say, but when I came here, I had quite a bit of experience and was kind of a leader in field education, and I kind of came here ready to kind of teach our students and sort of, give them the basics. And at this point, 9 years in, I describe my job as getting out of the way of the students and running along behind them and saying, wait, can I catch up? Simply, and that's not to say I have nothing to contribute, of course I do, but it's simply to say, I want, by getting out of the way, what I really mean is saying, you need to imagine, because what you're imagining is a new future and how to engage it. And I have to say that as a Christian minister who's done a lot of work in Christian theological education, it really has taught me so much, the creative ways in which our Buddhist students have been absolutely open to learning from a wide range of settings. And one more thing, if I can have the time to add it, is, again, a little bit embarrassing to say, but in Christian seminaries, sometimes we face a bit of a challenge, which is that we espouse theories about spiritual practices, and we understand that we should be doing these spiritual practices, but there sometimes is a bit of an embarrassing gap between talking about them and teaching them and practicing them. Now, it's not that Buddhist students are perfect in their practices, but actually, more often than not, students come here out of deep engagement for a very long time in practices. And they're sort of driven to integrating that with Pali study or scripture study or texts. But the practices often are very, very deeply ingrained. And I'm absolutely certain that this has troubled and disturbed many of our Christian students and gotten us a little more motivated to pay attention to what practice contributes to all religious engagement. So I think I'll stop there.
So when I wrote these thoughts to begin with, what I would ask each person, I headed these, I saved all the hard questions for Charlie. But Charlie, those of you who know Charlie Hallisey's a wonderful teacher here, a person whose sense of the moral project is incredibly high. And he's the kind of person that keeps our conversation about what we're doing here grounded in a much wider scope than that. And so, Charlie, I wanted you to think with us a little bit about what will this conference do if you could wave a wand right now and say, okay, I'd like to see the kinds of conversations or the kinds of activities happen over the next little while. What would you like us, who've been now doing a lot of talking, to be learning from all of the folks who are here today?
I just want to begin with Dudley's comment that he left the hard questions for me, in which I wonder what kind of strange karmic ripening is happening that I get these questions. Cheryl asked, how much sin could a little girl do? And I'm not sure how much sin I could have done and when Dudley told me other questions that he wanted me to ask in cahoots with Julie Gillette. And so I just want to acknowledge that a lot of the karmic ripening that's falling on me is her fault as well. All of this is occurring as well. Part of those questions was asked me, why do you think it is important to hold this conference, to bring this group of people together? What are your hopes for it? And then the question, what would happen if you waved a magic wand? Unfortunately, my karmic ripening doesn't seem to give me any magic wands. So let me just, the first question that I think is very important, and it's key to both my thinking for us coming together and for the weekend. Why do you think it's important to hold this conference, to bring this group of people together? It's another, I would say, wonderful karmic ripening that's been happening to me the last few months, in which I've been spending time with a group of Ethiopian evangelical Christians who have been trying to help a group of Eritrean Christians solve some disputes among them. Most of the time I don't understand what they're saying because they're talking in languages I don't know, Tigray. I didn't even know there was a language called Tigray until I met them, and Amharic. So lots of times I'm reduced to just watching body language to try to understand. One Ethiopian man was listening to someone very intently and very gently and carefully. And at the end of it, when the man, you could tell from his voice that he was expressing a great deal of bitterness of whatever had happened to this group. At the end of it, the Ethiopian leaned gently across and he said, I ask you to remember that you're going to die. That's the reason for coming together for this conference, for us to remember not to ground it in too big of a downer of a thing, but we are going to die. And the reason to remind ourselves of this is that I think that by doing that, the Buddha reminded us of this all the time, of saying, death is certain, life is uncertain. But the usefulness of reminding ourselves of this is that we have to attend to not what I think or you think or any of us think about what Buddhist ministry is as individuals, but what is connected to institutions. Because institutions allow us to do things that go beyond our own lives and that they go into the future. There are ways in which humans band together to give gifts to the future. And so part of asking ourselves, why are we coming together here, is that we're all coming together here as individuals, but also connected to different institutions of different varieties of things. So we want to ask ourselves how it is as individuals we contribute to thinking about the future of Buddhist ministry. But how is it that as people connected to different institutions, we are trying to do something that is connected to giving a gift to the future, to allow something that none of us as individuals can do, and I think possibly no single institution can do. And so some way in which we say to ourselves, oh, we have to do something to give this to the future so that people can have something that we value for ourselves. This, I think we can see something of this in the history of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. The stories about how the Pali Canon was written down, in which it was in a time of crisis, a famine, in which when people saw that what was happening to Buddhist learning, that there was only one monk who had memorized one of the texts of the canon, the Patisambhida, and the monks said, oh, we have to do something about this. We have to make sure that things are not lost. And so we have to write things down, and then we have to study them. And then it was a perennial debate between practice and study, which is more important. And part of the argument was studying, handing on things in study was a gift to the future. And so part of us being here at Harvard Divinity School, other institutions, part of what we're doing we're educational institutions. And part of what we're trying to do are a certain kind of gift to the future. But we can only do the kinds of things that we want to do in connection to other kinds of institutions where people are doing more practical things or out in the world doing kinds of things that we don't do. So it's a question about how institutions of different kinds come together. It's hard enough for institutions. It's hard enough for individuals to cooperate. It's hard enough for institutions that are similar to cooperate. But institutions that are of different kinds is something that we need a magic wand. And all of us might say, oh, we have to dream big. And once we start to dream, in the language, the beautiful title of Delmore Schwartz's short story, in dreams begin responsibilities. When we start to dream about things, then we start to have responsibilities to bring things about. In the Pali Canon, there's a couple of times where the Buddha speaks about what are the legs that the religious life stands on. And one time he says, oh, it stands on two legs, critical reflection, manasikaro, and the voice of another, the paratogosa. One of the things we can say, coming together is about this. All of us are reflecting on things that we know in our own lives, our own institutions. But we also want to listen to the voices of others in different kinds of places, to overcome our own limitations. And sometimes not just to only hear better practices that other people are doing so we can learn from them, but to hear good practices, better practices that other people are doing so we can support them. So it's not that we want to borrow them or take them, but we want to say, oh, we're so happy that that's happening. How can we do whatever we can to make sure you can keep on doing it? Because we can't do it, but we'll be very happy to have a future where you're doing this too. It's a very strange incident where someone comes clearly having heard the Buddha talk. The religious life stands on two legs. And so he says, I heard you say that the religious life stands on two legs. And the Buddha says, no, it doesn't. It stands on one leg, friendship. And so this is a very beautiful idea as well. But it's another kind of question to think, what does it mean for individuals to have friends? It's a bigger question, harder to imagine. What does it mean for institutions to have friends? So part of the question, what are my hopes for the conference, is for us to figure out how is it that institutions have friends? And here we can use Aristotle, that the friend is another self, where what you want is for someone else to have what they're doing. And you're wishing for it, doing everything you can to make that occur. We also know that what friends do is that, this is in the highfalutin language of Ricoeur, where he says, that the friend mediates between capacity and realization. It's only through having someone else, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a friend, sometimes a colleague, sometimes a peer, that helps you to realize the capabilities you have. And that's true of us as institutions. Each institution, perhaps, can't become what it's meant to be without having friends in other institutions. In terms of friendship, I think we can learn from the Buddhist Jatakas. All kinds of animals that aren't supposed to be friends with each other are always making friends with each other. People are always suspicious of that. When Monkey and Mr. Crocodile become best friends, Mrs. Crocodile says, I know that you're not friends with some monkey. There's another lady crocodile somewhere. And so people are always suspicious about that. So that's one of the things we'll have to face, that people will be suspicious about different institutions making friends with each other. What are you up to? What are you trying to do? We have to be alert to them. Let me just say some of the magic wand stuff. And I do wish that my karma will ripen this weekend, and you'll see me not waving a stick, but a wand. So one question is, are there things that we can do, that we can learn from each other in terms of best practices? But again, that's not only to learn from them, to say, we could do that too. But to say, what you're doing over there, we're so happy that that's happening. And it's important for us to know it because we can do something here that will help that over there be better. So that's one of the things to just say to some people. When we hear something, you say, I'm really glad to know that that's there because I want to contribute to that. There's another way. Is there a way that we can start to imagine our futures together? Not, I tell you what I want, and you tell me what you want, and both of us then go towards a future in our own ways. But to just say, we're all moving to some kind of horizon, a future together. And so to just say, how can we do that when we're all so different, and the institutions are different? Another big question. Can we do things together as institutions that one place cannot do alone? And so what we need to say is, what we want to do is something that just like no one person can do certain things. We have to join together and learn how to do that. We have to figure out ways that we say, no one institution can do what the world needs in the future. And that's what we're trying to figure out here to do together. In this, we can also ask ourselves, can we share what each of us has in ways that more than one of us, one institution, benefits? So that what we can say, we're doing something because we know it will benefit something here and something someplace else. And we build ways in which we're constantly thinking, how can more people get the benefit from this? Now, let me say that there are examples on this. My own experience in being in academic settings of teaching Asian languages like Burmese or Sinhala, Lao, Thai, what are officially known as less commonly taught languages that have small enrollments, that no dean, no administration of any university wants to pay for. So what you have are consortiums of universities in the United States that pool their resources to make sure that those languages are being taught, at least at one place, or all together in the summer so that people can learn them. And so we can say, consortiums are one way, informal networks are another way. They've been going on for a long time in academic Buddhist studies, the Buddhist Studies Graduate Student Conference each year, where students from different programs and academic studies come and see what is happening at other places. We know that different Protestant denominations have this, students studying at different divinity schools, meeting together in a denomination and say, oh, what's happening there, so we can learn about each other from each other. Really interesting thing of the Lilly Foundation sponsoring workshops. Richard Payne and I have spoken about this as summer camps for mid-career ministers, in which we're trying to figure out about, oh, what is the future of Buddhist ministry? It would be useful to collect together people who have figured it out for themselves, in which we say, oh, we want to learn from you, so we can start to help people not to have to duplicate all the struggling that you did, and to bring people together. So Lilly has sponsored mid-career workshops for ministers in the Midwest, Protestant ministers. So oh, perhaps we could learn from mid-career Buddhist ministers who've been doing things for a very long time. Let me just say the final thing. It's not the magic wand. It's a cold-eyed look. To just say the cooperation, as I said, is hard enough. But cooperation between individuals is hard enough. Cooperation between institutions is even harder, and particularly between some institutions, one of which employs me, that finds it hard to cooperate. And so one of the things to just say that, oh, that's a big issue as well. But our main challenge is for all of us to recognize that we are talking about cooperation between different species of institutions. Divinity schools, things in university settings, Buddhist universities, both in the United States and in Asia, traditional Buddhist centers of learning, of training, peer events, other kinds of monastic education centers, Dharma centers and temples, new kinds of organizations, NGOs, a huge variety of things. People working in universities as chaplains, people working in hospital chaplaincy, people working in university chaplaincy. All of these are different venues. And then each one of them has a different institution connected to it, helping to do that. But part of my hopes for our weekend together is to learn more about where each of us are. And in that learning about, from hearing what each one is doing, then we can say, oh, I'm so happy that you're doing that. And I'm trying to figure out what I can do here that can help you to do that better. And how what you're doing there will challenge us wherever we are to do things that we're doing better. So, one last thing I want to say is something I would say is particularly important, and I'm particularly aware both personally and working here at Harvard Divinity School. Part of the conference is you say there's something profoundly American, even if we're saying we want to be international, and Buddhism is a different way of thinking about things. But what I mean by profoundly American is that there's particular things about our history in this country that we find ourselves here that is part of what we need to think about. Part of that, Cheryl has noted rightly, is about race, of thinking about that we have responsibilities in terms of Buddhist ministry, plus as educational centers, to do something about both racial justice and healing in this country. This is part of our charge as being in these institutions. We are educational institutions in a nation that seems to be perpetually at war at this time. And that too is something that is part of our charge. We're a nation not only of immigrants, but of colonialism and imperialism. And that's also part of our institutional histories. And so grappling with those things too are things that we all need to face as well. So, no magic wand.
Thank you all very much. I think you can all agree that we've got off to a very good start with these panelists. Julie, do we have mics for questions? Okay, so this is all being recorded, and so we ask you to raise your hand and then wait for the mic to come so that it'll be recorded. Your question will be heard. We have about 20 minutes. I believe there's a bus that comes and takes some people to places to go. Is that right, at 8:45? All right, so we're about 8:10 now, so we'll go to 8:30 or a little after. Make sure you're not late for the bus. So I'll recognize you, and you can direct questions to anyone that you'd like to. or comments? Okay.
Professor Hallisey, thank you for everyone. Thank you, all the professors. Thank you very much for the wonderful ideas and thoughts. I would like to hear a little bit about the theme of the conference, Whither and Why. Thank you very much.
What is Whither and why? Why is that the theme? So it's Buddhist ministry, whither and why.
Right. And if we have your name, and I'd ask others also to introduce yourselves.
My name is Kusala. I'm an MTS. I'm a special student at the Divinity School.
Okay.
You just want to know why are we calling it that?
Why are we calling it Whither and Why?
This is part of my karmic ripening too. A figure that is very important in the history of the study of religion here at Harvard is a scholar named Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who for many years was the director of the Center for the Study of Religion across the street. In many ways, I think sometimes that everything happening in terms of connected to the study of religion, whether in MDiv, MTS, everything here at Harvard Divinity School, somehow Smith is in the woodwork of how we proceed about things. Mm-hmm. The title, the theme of this weekend's conference is an allusion to a manifesto that Smith wrote in the 1950s that was called Comparative Religion, Whither and Why. It's an old-fashioned English word, whither. Where should we go? It's not wither as withering on the vine. It's whither. What direction should we be going in? But when we say what direction we should be going in part, both being in the university, we always expect of ourselves to say why we're doing something. But it's particularly important in this conference when we are coming from such different institutions. We're all different people. And we have different visions of what is important to do, to say clearly to each other. Why? Why should we do this? So when we say whither is, what future are we heading towards? And why should we go to that particular future when there's other futures available to us?
And I would just add to that, I feel so fortunate to be on this committee that's thinking about Buddhist ministry. And one of the things that we realized as we were anticipating this conference is that, as Charlie has put it so well, we've been working at this for a number of years, but we don't see ourselves as knowing exactly what Buddhist ministry is or how to train it. We're doing the best we can, but it's vitally important to learn from all of you who've been working at this for a very, very long time. But at least we're not aware of this kind of conversation having been convened before. So the question is not like, we're going to answer whither and why. I just want to be clear about that. It's all of us are living into those questions.
We have one over here.
My name is Grace Shearson, and I'm from Shogaku Zen Institute in California. And we've started, a number of Zen teachers who were friends came together realizing how important friendship was to share how we were training our priests. And so we came together to talk about how we were training our priests and began training priests in a different way than would happen at a divinity school. And over dinner, I was learning from some of my colleagues their ways of training, whether they're priests or just lay people in the world. And I hope that I want to cut to the chase. How do I learn what other people are doing in a seminary setting, and also what are the different approaches that are happening in the graduate schools? What do they think is the most important thing? So that conversation, and I was imagining, my husband was here at the Ed School, and they had a mid-level, mid-career workshop during which they came together from all different universities and shared. And I was imagining a kind of summer colloquium or seminar where each person who had done some of this training, it took us through a day of their training. So things like that, solutions where we bring people together and they each teach the way they teach.
Wonderful
Experiential learning. That's great.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great idea. Are you all tired?
They're all in a state of equanimity. And
John, we got another mic here somewhere?
here it comes.
So my name's John McCransky, and I'm affiliated with Boston College and a kind of a Buddhist-based social service organization called Foundation for Active Compassion, and also Center for Buddhist Studies in Kathmandu, affiliated with Chugini Rinpoche. So this is kind of an inchoate question. You don't have to really try to answer it fully. But I'm just really struck, and I felt like maybe it would be important to raise it, even if we can't fully address it, to just hold it in our consciousness that we're also, it just feels like we're located in a certain historical moment in which different threads of differing cultures are coming together, and it's actually quite confusing. And the feeling that was coming up for me is, this isn't pessimistic at all, I don't mean that, but just that's a confusion worth being aware of. That is, it's a bit mysterious. Janet mentioned skillful means, but skillful means are things that have often been identified in retrospect after centuries of development and cultures. That's kind of what I'm alluding to, is that somehow we're at a point of intersection and development that perhaps we can't really comprehend anywhere near fully, and yet we have to grope and sort out as best we can. I just thought it was worth saying that, and if you had any reactions to that, or any even, not to get too much into it, but even any historical precedent. I mean, here we are at a non-Buddhist university in which Buddhism has been incorporated, and in the room are people from many different kinds of Buddhist institutions and integrated institutions and interreligious institutions. Has there been any historical precedent? Are we on our own here? Or do we have patterns of understanding that we can draw on or that are informing us?
Maybe you could elaborate what you mean by a particular special historical moment.
Yeah, I'm really feeling that. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? We have a lot of people in this room who are profoundly formed by Buddhist traditions. And we have a lot of people in this room who are thoroughly located in Western cultures and are finding a way of being both Buddhist, somehow expressing and embodying that, but at the same time not closing ourselves off, but being profoundly informed by the fact, as Cheryl and Charlie brought up, we're living in a history of prior colonialism and so forth here in America, and racial issues and all kinds of things. We're located at the intersection of all those things. That's not the exact location that any previous Asian Buddhist culture has been located in. They had their own very complex intersections. For example, when Buddhism came to China, not to go on and on with this, was an enormous complexity of forces and cultural shifts that are happening that Buddhism is coming into, and in part because Buddhism was perceived as somehow having something fresh to offer to many different threads of Chinese concern and perceived need, then all kinds of things began to emerge over a period of centuries. So I feel like we're similar. That's a similar historical moment here, very similar to that example of China.
So would someone like to reflect on it?
Well, the only thing that I would say is that it may be hard, it may be mysterious, it may be confusing. We may not be able to intellectualize everything that we're doing, but we have to do it, and we have to do it right now. We have to do it really fast. And I think the world at this moment, I think all of us are, the world situation is changing really amazingly fast at this moment, and we don't have a choice. So either you step up to the plate and jump in, even though you don't know exactly what you're doing, or you don't do anything. So hopefully some of the things we've learned in various ways from our Buddhist backgrounds and other backgrounds will help. There's a certain kind of creativity, inspiration, good karma will help. But yeah, we don't have a choice. So I feel I don't have a choice.
I really appreciate your naming that this is a confusing time. I think that's probably maybe the most important step to take, is to just name that. But I want to just remind us of Ron Heifetz's way of thinking about these things, my colleague here at Harvard, who talks about adaptive problems versus technical problems. And this is sort of adaptive learning versus technical learning. It isn't just about, a set of skills or practices, but it's cultural learning. It's listening to each other. It's not quite understanding the problem, and maybe it can't be understood, but just knowing that that's the kind of engagement we have, rather than trying to approach it as, let's just do these techniques and we'll have it solved. But instead to know no techniques are going to quite answer this situation. It's all about sort of adaptive, piece by piece learning that we have to do.
Like learning how to learn.
Learning how to learn.
Yeah, thank you. That's at the heart of it.
A lot of years ago, Harvey Cox wrote a book called, I think, Many Mansions. And it was one of the first books that he saw in this faculty that talked about kind of interreligious work, particularly because he named it as now a pastoral issue. Because before it could be theoretical, but now people were living next to each other. They were marrying one another. They were working side by side with one another. And I think that's part of this moment that we're in that feels different from some others, where we're just there. We can't avoid, as Janet said, we cannot avoid the fact that we are. It's not just in this room that we're gathered together. It's across so many other strata that we're gathered together, and so it's confusing. It's crazy making sometimes. It's good to remember that, but I think I hadn't thought of Harvey's book for a long time, but that insight that it was actually, from a ministry way of thinking, it a pastoral concern, because you're faced with it in your sort of existential being. Oh, we have.
Yeah, this isn't a new question, but it's a thought that just occurred to me in response to the point that John brought up. And that is that not only what makes this particular historical moment very special and unique is that, you see, in previous historical eras, when Buddhism came to a new country, it was accepted as a religion, as a spiritual discipline, because it was being integrated into cultures which had a predominantly spiritual orientation. But now Buddhism is becoming established within a culture which is predominantly secular. And so it faces the challenge of questioning itself whether its own orientation towards that culture is going to be that of a secular adaptation, which has been one very prominent trend, or whether it's going to preserve its religious roots, and in preserving its religious roots, how is it going to do so, either by a strict adherence to the old traditions, or by finding some kind of congruence or correspondence with the established religions of this culture.
Yeah, but what a great insight. There's a few over here.
Thank you. My name is Ruben Abito. I practice with the Zen Buddhist community in Dallas, Texas. And I also teach at a Christian school of ministry to prepare students for Christian ministry. And just following up on John's point that we are in a place of, well, maybe confusion, but not only confusion, but also a time of mutual learning and mutual fertilization. One of the joys that I had recently was when one of my students who had graduated told me that she had been on duty as a chaplain, and there was a Buddhist family who had just had a bereavement. And so she was there, and she had learned some Buddhist chants also and so forth. So the fact that a Christian minister was able to sit with a Buddhist family in their bereavement and join them in their Buddhist chant, and though they thanked her profusely and really appreciated her presence with them. And so in that regard, to be able to cross traditions and be able to minister to one another across those religious divides is one thing that I think is part of our contemporary challenge. So if Buddhist ministers could also be of the same availability to whether Christian or Jewish, other families and so on in those hours, that would really be something that we can also learn about from one another. How would, for example, a Buddhist also needs to learn how Christians do their thing, or Jewish and other religious traditions do their thing, so that they may be able to, when called for in certain circumstances, minister to them across traditions. So I think that that's one of the things that we can also learn from one another in this conference.
Thank you.
Do you want to walk the mic over there while I offer a question? Or? My name is Harrison Blum. I feel blessed to have gone here, graduated 3 years ago with an MDiv, and happily doing some Buddhist chaplaincy locally. And I think my question is something about marketing, maybe. I was at a Buddhist chaplaincy conference at Oxford, England, a little over a year ago, and one of the, if I remember it correctly, one of the concerns was that a lot of the hospitals were public, and so chaplains were only appointed and paid per, or in relationship to the per capita religious representation of that area. So there was a rise in training of Buddhist chaplains, but they had to be volunteer. There wasn't that many paying jobs, and that's hard to make it work if you want to be a Buddhist chaplain but can't get paid to do it. And I think about advertisements in Tricycle magazine for different Buddhist chaplaincy trainings, and like myself, I benefited. I think they're great trainings, and I'm also concerned, what can we do or what should we do about making sure there's an outlet or a role for the well-trained, well-connected people. It kind of gets to your institutional relationship point, Charlie, I think. I think about a friend who works at a chaplain nearby, he works at a prison as a chaplain. I think there's 1.5 or 2.5 chaplains per 1,000 inmates. So, yeah, maybe I've phrased it enough, but I'm just curious, what happens when we do everything we can do well? What's the outcome, and where do people go?
Anybody have an answer?
That's the $64 million question.
Graduate of this program.
Yeah. Maybe we'll be answering that slowly over the course of the conference.
One of the things maybe just for us to observe, I think that this is not something unique to Buddhist ministry. And that this is part of the signs of the times. It might be that, as I heard a Protestant bishop actually say, that we're living in the end of denominational religion. And so then the idea, that there's a training that goes to a certain kind of position, that's uncertain for everything about Buddhist ministry. And we feel that way because it's new. But it may not be only because it's new. It may be true for everyone going through ministry programs. And that's the case of peer institutions for Harvard Divinity School. That would be denominational seminaries. They're closing. And they're going into other kinds of activities, online teaching and things like this. So this is a very, very important issue to take seriously institutionally. A training for what? And how to have people preparing to do what is really part of what we need to discuss.
Very good answer. Thank you, Charlie. We have a question over here.
This is also in Kuwait. My name is Angel Kyoto Williams.
A little louder.
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah, my name is Angel Kyoto Williams, and this is something threading some of the different pieces that have already been said. I was struck by the panel's discussion about the allowing themselves to learn from the students in particular. And one of the things that I see in the way that I'm, the places that I'm moving in through the world is particularly as white privilege is challenged and whiteness is challenged, and a shifting and new demographic of practitioners starting to engage Buddhism, questions about how the teachings are being interpreted and where the space is to allow for us as teachers, as ministers, as chaplains, to actually allow ourselves to learn from people that have historically been marginalized, and they're actually bringing their own strength and stream of weight and needs and understandings, and therefore interpretations of the teachings. And so it's not really so much a question, but kind of putting it in the room about how we're seeing, like at this particular moment, right, this historical moment where people are stepping into a realization of the power imbalances that we've been burdened by in this country for so long, and people are stepping into their power about it, and also white folks are realizing the kind of power they've been holding. How do we make space to allow for the possibility of being willing to learn as teachers, as the people that are offering the teachings, and where is the space, right? What is the opportunity for us to learn about the historical interpretation that we've taken in the West, and how much of that has been specifically Buddhist, and how much of that has been fraught with the power dynamics and the dominant paradigm.
Thank you for that. That's a great reminder that, and we know just you don't have to ask the question in this environment, right? You just have to pick up the New York Times or watch the news and know that we're a long way from getting to the core of that question, right? How do we listen to people who have been on the margins? How do we make space for those voices to teach us, not just to have a voice, right?
But I do think that it's very much it's our responsibility as teachers to first of all put our own selves on the line. On the one hand, to be willing and open to admitting our own complicitness and our own history, and have that style of being as a model for, when a teacher does that, when a teacher is able to admit their own vulnerability, their own error, their own mistakes, becomes a model for learning. And I think it's a very, very important part of pedagogy, is to be able to own up to and reveal your own faults, so to speak. And I do think it's part of, I would hope it's part of Harrison's question as well. The other part of it is knowing how to listen and be edified and be changed, and recognize, that the kind of teaching we've been doing, is always needs to be corrected and changed. And as I go on in my career, I realize a lot of things that I wasn't doing before that I need to do now, and a lot of different voices that I need to hear from. One hopes that in the course of, it's the basic Buddhist capacity of perceiving need, perceiving compassion, and listening to other people, that by virtue of recognizing what the needs are, one is indeed responding to what is needed, which then creates spaces where you can help. And so hopefully it's a kind of organic process. By the more we're kind of flexible and open enough, that we will be recognizing what are the things that we need to do, and the institutions or the collectives or the communities or whatever they are will in some way or organically occur, although one has to be conscious of cultivating those things.
So we are at
She wants to
8:35.
Response?
Yeah. Okay.
So for me, what's important about being here together is actually not so much about individual teachers, but rather about how we're thinking of that as a body, right? Like, how do we think about how structurally it's been embedded? And so yes, individually for sure, right? But actually, how do we use an opportunity like this of being together to think about how it is we may have been structurally framing the way that we present teachings in a way that is not is not receptive, and so moving just beyond individual ways of our individual pedagogy.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's helpful clarification and important. So we are at about 8:35. Some of you have a bus to catch.